This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com with your Sunday update for this 7th day of November 2010. And now for the real news. In our top story this week, awareness of serious questions about the official government story of 9/11 is rising dramatically as a new advertisement about the mysterious collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 began airing in the New York metropolitan area.
I lost my son,
my nephew,
my uncle,
my son
on September 11th, 2001.
Most people don't know that a third tower fell on September 11th.
World Trade Center 7, a 47-story skyscraper, was not hit by a plane.
Although the official explanation is that fire brought down Building 7.
Over 1,200 architects and engineers have looked into the evidence
and believe there is more to the story.
Bring justice to my son,
my uncle,
my nephew,
my son,
and thousands of others who died on September 11th.
Go to buildingwhat.org.
The campaign, promoting the buildingwhat.org website, which gives further information about the evidence for the controlled demolition of Building 7, has been sponsored by a grassroots funding drive promoted by the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and other organizations. The ad will be running on CNN, MSNBC, the Comedy Channel, CNBC, VH1, and 8 other stations until the 10th of November and will air over 350 times and is projected to reach millions of viewers in the New York area, many of whom have never seen the collapse of Building 7. The campaign is part of a rising tide of interest in the concerns of the 9/11 Truth movement, which coincides with the recent release of thousands of videos of Ground Zero from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which used the videos in crafting its report on the collapses of the World Trade Center, but which has been held under lock and key away from public scrutiny until pried free via a FOIA request from the International Center for 9/11 Studies. Many of the newly released, previously secret videos reveal new audio evidence of the explosions at World Trade Center 7 prior to its collapse.
Unbelievable. Oh my God. Last explosion was something because now there's a lot of police activity and sirens and more smoke rising from the ground, new smoke. So there was some kind of additional explosion, but I don't know what it was. Definitely.
NIST cited a lack of audio evidence of explosions at Building 7 as its primary reason for dismissing the voluminous evidence that the building was brought down in a controlled demolition. Now that even more evidence is emerging to show that there is indeed audio evidence of such explosions, and that NIST was the very organization that has been keeping that information secret for the past 9 years, it remains to be seen what pressure will be brought to bear for a re-investigation on the WTC-7 collapse. In other news this week, another television advertisement is generating controversy after it was banned from airing on networks like ABC, A&E, and the History Channel. The ad, produced by Citizens Against Government Waste, deals with the timely issue of increasing U.S. debt and was deemed too controversial by the networks, who are refusing to air it.
Why 什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国。 因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支、庞大的医疗改革、政府接管私有企业、债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can change the future. You have to. Join Citizens Against Government Waste to stop the spending that is bankrupting America.
Precisely what is controversial about the commercial is not entirely clear, especially since it is well known that the US national debt is currently almost $14 trillion, a number almost equal to the gross domestic product of the country, and that 20% of that debt is currently held by China. Perhaps the advertisement can be construed as controversial insofar as it fails to take into account newly released information from the Federal Reserve itself, which shows that in engaging in its now infamous second round of quantitative easing to buy over $700 billion in Treasury securities over the next 6 months, the Federal Reserve will in fact overtake China to become the largest holder of US debt by the end of this month. In other economic news, newly released data indicates that over 42 million Americans are now relying on government-issued food stamps to buy basic groceries. Recent survey data shows that 28% of American households have at least one member who is looking for a full-time job. The former CEO of America's 10th largest bank went on record earlier this month to declare that the bankruptcy of the US government is now a mathematical certainty. Credit bureaus are implementing new invasive ways to spy on the personal financial records of potential loan recipients, including ways to probe utility and rent payment history, estimate personal income, gauge home value, and other tangential financial data. The global economic meltdown is continuing apace as the UK begins its austerity-driven asset fire sale by selling a 30-year concession to 2 Canadian pension funds to operate the rail link between London and the Channel Tunnel. And the National Inflation Association has released alarming new inflation estimates because of the devaluation of the dollar caused by the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing, including estimates of $23 loaves of bread, $45 orange juice cartons, $15 candy bars, and over $55 for slave-made Chinese Walmart t-shirts. Meanwhile, key current and former officials of the privately owned Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, are scrambling to allay global alarm over the crumbling economy and the disastrous decision of the Fed to devalue the ailing US dollar even further. In the face of economic and financial analysts of every conceivable stripe, Bernanke went out of his way to defend this so-called QE2 by arguing the semantics that the Fed is not creating inflation, but fighting disinflation. "We are not in the business of trying to create inflation," he said at a conference held on Jekyll Island, the very spot where banksters met in complete secrecy 100 years ago to hatch their plans for a privately controlled bank through which they could control the American economy. "Our purpose is to provide some additional stimulus to help the economic recovery and to avoid, potentially, additional disinflation." Speaking at the same conference, which many analysts are pointing out is a type of morbid 100-year birthday party to celebrate the realization of the original dream of the banksters who created the privately owned Fed, namely that a tiny group of unimaginably wealthy individuals would be able to steer the economy of America, and indeed the world, into a depression in order to buy up global assets at pennies on the dollar, former Fed Chairman Paul Volcker made the laughable assertion that the Federal Reserve is not an abhorrence against nature and the subject of an increasingly virulent revulsion by people of all stripes and persuasions, but in fact a loved and respected institution. The Federal Reserve is respected, and it's respected at a time when respect and trust in all our government institutions is all too rare, he lied to the attendees of the Jekyll Island conference. It's that respect and that trust that at the end of the day is vital to the acceptance of its independence and to support for its policies. As many analysts are noting, the mendacity of this statement is easily enough verifiable by the fact that the phrase "end the Fed," a slogan adopted by the vast majority of the public who do not believe that a privately owned institution should have the power to create money out of thin air and then tax the citizenry for the pleasure of doing so, now returns over 92 million results in Google searches. Earlier this week, longtime Federal Reserve opponent Ron Paul announced that he and his newly elected senator son Rand Paul will introduce legislation to end the Fed on their very first day in office of the new congressional term.
Well, you know, first of all, we're going to get to the Fed. I know our audience wants to hear about it. You want to talk about it, but I got to congratulate you on Rand Paul. Your son just blew away the competition last night. Any advice? Did you call him up to offer any?
Well, he called shortly afterwards. He called awfully early, and he was awfully surprised it was so early. He didn't have his shirt and tie on yet. So, yeah, we talked a little bit, and we're talking about what we might do. One thing he'd like to do is have a joint party on our swearing-in day, which would be beneficial or very nice for both of us.
That's kind of nice. But beyond the parties, any specific advice on how we should govern?
Well, yes, I suggested to him we have at least one specific bill that we introduce on the first day that both of us are there, and he says, how about end the Fed? So, end the Fed or audit the Fed. We'll do something with monetary policy on our first day to make a point.
Now please go to CorbettReport.com to download episode 160 of the Corbett Report podcast, Who Owns Your Property?, where we explore how governments have tricked us into giving up ownership of our own possessions, and look at examples of how an educated and informed public is fighting back.